Core 2 Duo systems are obsolete these days, and Core 2 Quad builds aren't long for the gaming world either. But can you still make a decent LGA 775 build to play earlier games in 2019? For today's build, we have a custom-built PC with parts a friend and I found laying around in our houses. Starting off with the motherboard, we have a Foxconn G31 MVP motherboard. It's a micro ATX motherboard with the LGA 775 socket. It's got two PCI slots, a PCI Express 16 slot, PCI Express 1 slot, and two DIMM slots. I wish it had 4 DIMM slots, but oh well. For the memory, we have 4GB of DDR2 800MHz RAM. This would have been 8GB if there were 4 DIMM slots, and since we were going for a free build, we didn't want to buy two 4GB sticks. If I knew anyone in town who was giving away parts, I would look there, but this will work for now. For the processor, we've got a Core 2 Quad Q8400 running at 2.66 GHz with a 1333MHz FSB. It's got 4MB of L2 cache, is based on the 45nm node, and has a TDP of 95 watts. For the graphics card, we have a Geforce GT 620 with 1GB of DDR3 memory, running at 700MHz with a 1400MHz core clock. It's got 96 CUDA cores, OpenGL 4.2 support, as well as DirectX 12 support, and a TDP of 49 watts. It's not a bad card for the cost of free. For hard drives, I'm just using the hard drives from one of my other setups. For booting programs, I have an 80GB Western Digital Caviar Blue, and for documents, I have a 40GB Seagate Barracuda. These drives are both pretty old, but they work just fine. Sure, they're slow, but nothing I can't handle. I would like to put an SSD in here at some point, but for a free build, this works just fine. To put this all together, I used the case of an HP Compact DC5100. It's just standard micro ATX, and it worked perfectly for this build. Since the original parts in the case were long gone, I figured this case needs a use, so I just jumbled all the parts in there and it works fine. Now that the computer's set up, I decided to install Windows 10 so I got that DirectX 12 support, although I didn't benchmark any DirectX 12 games, and you'll see why. Now that we've gone over specs, let's get on to see how the PC functions. Web browsing is flawless on this computer, and you can play YouTube videos in 1080p with no problem. And for general tasking, this computer is more than you even need in 2019. If all you want to do is browse Facebook and use Word, Core 2 Duo would work just as fine, but the extra cores in the quad do help out. Anyway, let's get on to the gaming benchmarks. First up, we have Skyrim with a mixture of low to medium settings at 720p for an average of 40 FPS with minimums of 26 and a maximum of 61. This is pretty solid, comparable to the Xbox 360 version of the game. The frame times were consistent, the gameplay was nice, and all around just a fairly decent experience. Next up, we're testing Minecraft 1.13 with Optifine at 720p. We've got fast graphics with smart leaves, 12 chunk render distance, particles decreased. Basically a mixture of low to medium settings. Here we get an average of 103 FPS with minimums of 0 and a maximum of 207. The 0 frame minimum happens on pretty much any computer, as that's just load times, and the slowdowns will happen less often if you have a faster processor, but for this setup, the game runs great. Next up, we have Borderlands 2, which ran the worst out of the games we tested. With minimum settings at 720p, we got an average of 22 FPS, with a minimum of 15 and a max of 30. The game didn't seem to stutter, so the CPU is fine, but the DDR3 graphics was just holding the game back. A 1GB GDDR5 card like I used to have, 560 Ti, the game would run with flying colors, so it's just that slow DDR3 memory holding us back. For the next game, we have Half-Life 2 running at a mixture of medium to high settings in 720p for an average of 130 FPS, with a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 180. The minimum was likely due to loading times, as the game ran smoothly with little to no stuttering. I mean, this game was designed to run on a potato, so really it's expected it would perform well, but I figured this would be a good benchmark. And if you're wondering, yes, this PC can in fact run Crysis. At 800x600 with minimum settings, we got an average of 45 FPS with a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 104. 0 was probably just loading times again, but I don't know where or how it got to 104, even in like a 1 frame max or something, but I'll take every frame I can get. If you can deal with all the graphics down, you can get a decent frame rate. I'm sure this is how most people played it in 2007 or 2008 to even get 20 FPS, so this is good enough for me. Now, should you go out and buy a GT 620 and Core 2 quad? In 2019, I'd say probably not, because you can get a Sandy Bridge board and i5 for dirt cheap these days and put something like an R7 250 and you're good. However, if you can get all these parts for free like I did, I say go for it, because it's a fun thing to do is build computers, and it's decent for mid-2000s gaming. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, feel free to subscribe, as I hope to do more cheap PC builds as I get more parts, and maybe I can do some gaming videos and whatnot with this machine. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.